Thank you very much for logging on tonight to Hidden Histories. This is URBAN-15's e-magazine monthly program where we bring you something hidden about the arts and culture of San Antonio. We have pursued this. I think this is our 20th episode, and all of them are getting a little bit more intense and exciting because we're hitting the meat of the hidden histories now. In the beginning, we were learning how to do this. We have a good crew that we've assembled, good people who are supporting us, and I want to thank all the people who email us and write us and send us notes about what subject matters we should consider. Tonight, I want to say special thank you to it's almost to the end of our 2-year funding cycle with the San Antonio Area Foundation, Santikos Foundation, who was able to give us the seed money to put Hidden Histories together. I want to thank them very much. City of San Antonio, particularly the Film Commission, who thought that we would be a great way to explore media rather than through the film and theatrical release format. They decided that going with a social media magazine show would be a great idea. Texas Commission on the Arts has been very big in supporting us, the Capital Group, Valero, and HEB. So thank you very much for your support. We hope that we'll be entering a 3rd year of Hidden Histories in January. Tonight, tomorrow's election day. And in exactly a year from now, we'll be moving into the presidential and the congressional and statewide elections as well. And politics is changing, and much of it may have to do with the fact that we've changed the way we communicate. Tonight we're going to explore that hidden history of printed media. If you wanted to get your message out, you went to a printer and you had palm cards, posters, yard signs, things like that. You had it printed and you gave it to people. The medium was paper. Today, that medium is now electronic, and it's flying through the air. It's coming through fiber optic. It's coming over the airwaves, and it's a different thing. Once it gets to you, it's gone. So we're going to go through the archives that Eddie Ybarra has put together. We're working on this one together, and they're the archives of Munguia Printers, the printing shop. And the archives come from many years of doing printing on the west side for politics. In the old days, the concept of an archive was just never a small business concept. When you finished a job, you threw it out. You sold it to Newell Salvage for paper. They could turn it into rags. So the idea of saving everything that you printed and putting it away so in the future historians could look at it and get a snapshot of what was it like in 1952 or what was it like in 1958 in the electoral process. We are fortunate that we have found a few boxes from the printing shop, and these give us an immense insight though of basically late 70s through the mid 80s, the politics of San Antonio. So tonight we're going to explore that. Eddie will be here in just a few moments, and we'll be talking about the change of when the mom and pop printing shop still had a voice in democracy. And then later in the evening, we have a very special guest, Dr. Henry Flores, who's a professor of political science and urban studies at Trinity, and for a long time was at the St. Mary's School of Law. But I remember Henry as an altar boy at Sacred Heart. And, his ethics and his politics and his clarity of vision has given him the ability to look at what is happening in a very macro way. We have him tonight, and he's going to be kind of like discussing where do we go from here. We're in the new times, we're in a new space, we're in a new behavior. And this isn't always the best behavior, but politics has always been a contact sport. And we hear about at the Continental Congress and at the places at the first Senate and the first inaugurations, people hit each other with their canes and they fought on the floor. So things are getting digital, but we still get bruised. So my interest in the printing shop was always the stuff, but I love the sound. And we have found a tape of some of my music students from 1980 or 81, where we spent afternoons at the printing shop learning the rhythms of the different presses. And so we found this excerpt. It's a little video called La Prensa. Wow, that was a nice experience. I hadn't seen that tape in at least 20 years, so it was good. So we have our guest tonight, Eddie Coy Ybarra. And if those of you know San Antonio's history and much about the Sheriff's Department and Texas Rangers, the Coy family was very involved in public safety, you might say.
That is correct, during that time, yes.
During the early days of the...
Early days, during the
early days of the Republic.
1800s, yeah.
Yeah. So, Eddie, just I want to kind of say that the impact of San Antonio would, because of the Munguia Printers, is enormous. We would not have the voice we have as any kind of leadership had we not had the ability to put leaders into positions, and it was because of their drive and their intelligence in going to Munguia Printers to get printing done. So,
correct.
Can you give me, I mean, you went there in the beginning, you came in when it was flying high, and you saw the best years. Can you give us an
I came aboard around 1965, George. And of course, during that time, letterpress was still being used. Letterpress printing was still being used, but primarily now we were going to offset printing, which was one of the latest techniques now. We were using negatives, plate to press, conventional presses. And granted, I have to give credit to my father-in-law, Ruben Munguia, simply because of his involvement in the city of San Antonio, dealing with the politicians. That was what he loved to do. The politicians would come in, they word of mouth primarily, and this is how it revolved itself into what it is, what it was then, and today it's totally done in a different manner. People would come in, they'd sit with Ruben, and his joy was being able to get a pencil like this, number 2, and start working on the layouts that the customer sat with him. And it was primarily an interview that Ruben was having with the potential candidates that were seeking office. That's how it started. He played an intricate part in helping these men and women who were seeking office in this city. And of course, you know, when you talk about Munguia Printers at one time during the 60s, it was one of the largest print shops here in San Antonio. We employed over 45 people. We ran 2 shifts. And we were also the largest unionized shop in South Texas at that time. And of course, all of this was started by your grandfather, Romulo Munguia, who was an immigrant from Mexico, who arrived here in 1926 and started Munguia Printers around 1934. He started with La Estrella print shop, which was a garage next to his house on Saunders Street.
I think Jonathan, we have a photograph of that print shop. That's the original printing shop.
That is correct,
and
yes.
That's Aunt Stella in the front end.
Right, and you see the star, that's why it was called La Estrella Company. And from what I understand, the story that was told to me, that sign came from Texaco.
Yeah,
that's gasoline station.
And there was a storm on Zarzamora or someplace,
yeah.
And it blew down the street, and the boys went and brought it back.
They brought it back, and they call it La Estrella because it had the star emblem.
Put it in the nails like that.
Nailed it to the building.
That next image, that's the hot press lead.
That was, it was referred to as the linotype, which was a typesetting machine that was used and invented by Otmar Mergenthaler. He was the founder of this, and there's Mr. Ruben Munguia, who was also a linotypist. And when I came aboard the print shop, I was Mr. Munguia, the founder of the company. I was his apprentice. And that's how I learned how to operate the linotype as well. But the story behind that is a little bit funny, I think, because I was hired. Martha came home one day and said, Grandpa would like for us to go home to his house on a Sunday for dinner. So we did, and to make the long story short, he offered me a job. I said, okay. I said, do you need to talk to your son, Ruben? He said, oh, no. He says, I am the president. I decide who to hire and fire. I said, okay. Anyway, I showed up, gave my 2 weeks notice where I was at, and came to work. Where I used to work, George, I wore a white shirt and a tie, dress slacks, nice pair of pants. I show up dressed like that at the print shop. Mr. Munguia, the son, Ruben, tells me, wait for Papa, he'll be here in a minute. Wait for him in the front office. So I did. He shows up. He looks at me and he says, go home and change. I said, okay. So I go home and change. He said, put some work clothes on. So I did. I came back. And then I see him working on the linotype. And my job was, he was going to take the linotype apart. He was give me the part. I needed to sit in an area that he prepared, big old pan. This can of kerosene, you pour in there, here's your brush, and you clean each part. I said, okay. So I did that. I thought I was going to go home at 4:30 the way I used to. No, I was there till 10. And I said, do I really like this? So I go home, right? And I'm sitting there. Martha looks at me, and she sees how I look. My hands, I said, Martha, I don't know if I'm going to like this job, if this is what I'm going to be doing. My fingernails were black, my hands were dirty. But anyway, that was just the story that I had to share with you. That's how I started.
Well, you know,
the business.
the modern printers, all they know is coding.
There you go.
They sit there at the computer
Exactly.
and they whip it out.
And so from there, I learned the business, George, from the bottom up.
Okay.
And it was a wonderful experience.
We have a couple of more photographs that I'd like to share with the audience today. There's okay, this is a Munguia printer flyer about the printing shop and their belief in.
Well, that just goes to show you how Mr. Munguia laid this thing out. And you can see some of the sketch marks that he prepared. You can see the type that he chose. And this is what he was good at. And not only did he do that, but he also learned from the circulars that we used to print for the grocers, starting with the Chinese grocers in the 1930s. And from there, the shop revolved, and H-E-B was one of our customers, Piggly Wiggly, et cetera, et cetera. And we did a lot of printing on the big web unit that we had, and that's primarily what we used to do when I first started. Then, and we used to print newspapers as well, the Today's Catholic, the Kelly Observer, the Lackland Tailspinner, and the Sam Houston Patriot newspaper. But then change came, and we started putting more emphasis on commercial accounts. Some of the accounts that we had at that time were Southwest Bell, the City of San Antonio, the Spurs, all the universities, UTSA when they first arrived here in 1968. We started doing some of their printing, and it continued until they put their own print shop, and Southwest Bell did the same thing. Our Lady of the Lake did the same thing. The City of San Antonio did the same thing. I mean, it was just something that happened to any family-owned shop. It was just like your small grocery stores. You know, changes were occurring very rapidly.
Well, let's move on to another slide here, and this is
Lila Cockrell.
Lila Cockrell. And if you notice, what is she running for?
Yeah, place one, City Council, place one.
Place one.
District one.
This is all single-member districts.
There you go.
Yeah, and that's.
You know, so and George Sturcott, there's another lady that we knew very well. We were in high demand during that time, George, where we would have candidates running for office. Sometimes at one time, I can remember a race, we had 4 people that were running for mayor, and we did printing for all 4. And granted, there were some candidates that couldn't understand. They wanted Ruben's endorsement, and he wouldn't give it. He says, no. He says, I'm here to help. I treat everybody the same. I'll help you, and I'll help if you're running for dog catcher, whatever it may be, or mayor. You know, I'm going to give you the same service, the same guidance that you're seeking. And that's the kind of man he was.
Well, the thing is, I do remember from the beginning of my memory days, a candidate would come in, total stranger, and he would sit with them 3 or 4 hours, and by the end of the thing, there'd be a little SketchUp, a little program,
yes.
and everything would be done. So the concept development, the R&D, the mission, the statement, the branding, all of that got done like in 3 hours over a bottle of Presidente and a piece of paper. And now it takes consultants from advertising agencies.
Well, I'll give you an example. That's exactly what he loved to do. And most of the candidates that did come in had no knowledge of what they wanted. He would ask, what is your mission statement, and take it from there, come up with a design, and by sometime either that afternoon or in the morning, he'd have a proof ready for them. That was what he specialized in, and he learned that from the grocery store circulars that he used to do himself. HEB representative would come in, give him a sheet with the featured items. He would sit there and sketch out the different items that were going to be sold in the different locations where HEB was going to be at. You had the west side, east side, north, south side. And of course, the west side, he would put pinto beans, he would put round steak, hamburger meat. As an example, the north side, you had sirloin steak, etc., etc. And these were things that they wanted, that HEB wanted, and he did that for the stores. And he incorporated that theory into what we were doing for the politicians that came into the shop.
Well, I remember races, everything from a school board to a gubernatorial race.
Well, even the president.
Oh, wow.
There's Ed Garza.
Who's that young guy? Yeah.
I knew him when he had hair. And of course, you know.
Charlie?
Yeah, Charlie Gonzalez, yeah. And, you know, Ed Garza, and some of these people, candidates, stayed very, very committed, very loyal to Munguia Printers. There's Bobby Perez, Mike Verreal, yes, all of those people we did printing for. Joe Bernal.
Great.
Gregory Luna, yes.
Oh, well, that was a heavy one.
Yeah, there you go.
That was heavy.
And that was very popular during those times when you would have a candidate that was running and Ruben would come up with an idea. Okay, let's get people to believe that you're being endorsed by all these people. And he would put, like he has there, Clinton and Gore and Bobby Puentes and Cito Rodriguez. And, you know, and he would use that as a theme to get the people to believe that they were getting endorsements from those candidates.
Yeah. Well, if you could get it down to what's happening into the future.
Well, let's move fast forward now.
Yeah.
Okay. Fast forward, one of the things that I noticed, and Ruben knew this too, I mean, he was a very smart individual. When Desktop Publishing came out with their program, things started to change quickly for us. I can remember, and I'll tell you this story. This is a true story. A potential candidate said he wanted to talk to Mr. Munguia. He wanted to come by. Knowing Mr. Munguia, he was ready. He has sat up in the front desk. The guy comes in and he says, "Hi, Mr. Munguia, I'm so-and-so," and he gives him a CD. That's exactly what he said. He looked at me, the man left, and he said, "Take this damn thing." And I took it upstairs, and I put the information that was on there, and it was already prepared.
Laid out.
They knew exactly what they wanted, and this is what happened to our way of printing. Technology came into being, and it was fantastic, to be honest with you. The way things are done, even today, so much faster. The way we used to print was paste up, was typesetting, paste up, camera, plate to negative to conventional presses that we had. Well, changes were coming. No longer did they use that technique. Now they use technology. They use now digital printing, where we were called typesetters. These young people were graphic designers, and they did everything they needed to be done. And they would go from computer to press. And that's what happened. That's what happened in our industry. And what you mentioned earlier today, that is still today. They print that way. It gets out a whole lot faster, and that's history.
You know, the thing is, in the old days, when you put something in ink on paper and you screwed up and you misspelled something, or you had to throw the whole job away, or you just lived with it. Now you can make, you have spell check, then you have everything that just kind of style checks. But I do miss the actual look of on paper, the anomalies, the little pieces of missing type, the little burrs on the letters.
Yeah, well, of course, and this is the way it was done. I mean, at the shop and other print shops throughout the United States, throughout Europe as well. That's the way we did printing at that time.
Okay, well, Eddie, we've had a great time here. I think this is the beginning of many, many more conversations together, because we have a hidden history in this whole story of San Antonio printing and politics. So
thank you, George, for inviting me.
Why don't we just enjoy a bit? I have about 20 or 30 slides here of we can run of more things that were printed at Munguia Printers. Hey, glad to see you, Dr. Flores. Appreciate you coming by tonight and talking to us and being with us. And you've seen some examples of what we were discussing earlier, but you now step back a little bit more and don't get your hands in the ink, but you get your hands into the thoughts. And you've been able to analyze what this printing shop did on the west side of San Antonio a bit, and also the people that benefited from that, those politicians, what they did in San Antonio with that power once they got it. So let's just have fun.
Have fun, okay. Yeah, I don't know. It was, Munguia Printers was an icon on the west side, an icon in political circles, because you had to go to him to get your printing done, because he's the one that knew how to do political printing, the signs and the palm cards and the things that you would send through the mail, things of that nature. And so everybody went to him, and he did all the work. As Eddie said at the beginning of the first part of the program, he did all his layout, he did the branding. I spoke to one politician, and she actually told me that she had never run for office before, but somebody said, well, you have to go to Ruben Munguia to talk about your printing materials. So she walked into his office, and the first thing he did was ask her about her family and her background and where she was from and how she grew up. And she told me that she couldn't figure out where he was going with all this, but what he was really doing was trying to establish a foundation from which he could construct a message for her. And from that, he designed all the material for her first campaign for city council. And that's just the way he was in those days. You had to go to him. And of course, the stories that emanated into the community about what went on in that office. I mean, you know, a lot of it is political chisme, and some of it is truth and some of it isn't, like a lot of political stories. But his meetings after work were legendary about, and some of the stories would be like, oh, he was scheming and organizing and putting together candidates and slates of folks to go out there and run for a political office. And you know, he may have given his imprimatur very informally to some, and you always knew who he liked or didn't like. But that man was really, really an important person to know and to work with if you were going to run a political campaign back in the 50s and 60s and early 70s. Absolutely.
Well, one of the things that we have are the rise of politicians in opposition to the GGL, the Good Government League,
right,
and those that embraced it and used that as a stepping stone, knowing at some point that organization would no longer exist and they'd already be in office. So have you done much work in that GGL relationship there?
Some. I do know that the Good Government League originally rose to fight the old Callahan machine, the commissioners' rings that used to run the city of San Antonio. And they took over in 48, they arose and then they took over. But they themselves became kind of entrenched in the whole political system, and they became somewhat of a machine themselves. And some members of the Good Government League, Henry Cisneros, for instance, the former mayor, was actually recruited on one of the last tickets of the Good Government League to run as a city council person. But he quickly separated himself from them because I think he also felt that they were kind of going one way and they weren't looking at the city in a progressive sort of way. He wanted to take development one way, and they wanted to stay very, very localized and they had a very parochial way of looking at politics in San Antonio. At the same time, there was a lot of dissatisfaction with the way they were running things. So you see a lot of these independent candidates. Charlie Becker, for instance, ran against them, and Pete Torres, and then later there was the Better Barrio, I think it was the Barrio Betterment coalition with Mario Compian, Rosie Castro, etc., that started coming after them in quite dramatic ways. And then the city got threatened with a lawsuit that changed the election structure from an at-large system to a single-member district system. And all those combined to end the Good Government League for the most part. And they kind of passed from the scene, like a lot of those political organizations.
The significance of that photo earlier of a palm card for Lila Cockrow, it said place one.
Place one.
Can you explain how place versus district, what does that mean?
Yeah, well, in the old days under at-large elections, there were places, literally numbered places on the ballot. So there's like 1 through 9. And everybody understood that a certain place was the mayoral candidate. And technically by the city charter, once that council was seated, then they would vote among themselves to select the mayor from that group. But each place had no real geographical orientation. As a matter of fact, part of the evidence in the lawsuit against the city was to show that all the people that were running in all the places all lived in roughly the same area of the town, in and around a certain cluster of north side neighborhoods. And the rest of the city was not very well represented. And so when single-member districts came into play, and we created 10 city council districts, they were geographically oriented, And the law required that each candidate live in that district and only represented those people in that district. As a result, they only ran in that district. Under the old place system, each place was elected at large, so everybody had to run citywide. That made campaigning difficult because you had to have a lot of money to run throughout the entire city. As a matter of fact, when Ruben Munguia was running advertising material for the candidates, I suspect that he would leave the Union Bug off of some of the neighborhoods for the same candidate, put the Union Bug on other advertising signs. The Union Bug is a little designation on the bottom of a piece of campaign material that says it's been printed by a union shop. But even though Ruben's shop was a union, not all the material that came out of his shop had the Union Bug on. Right.
Well, you know, as a result of that, we actually got candidates that came out of the neighborhoods and could run successfully. And you referenced the young woman candidate in District 1, which was Councilwoman Maria Antonieta Berrizabo.
That's correct.
When she ran first, she didn't have much money, and I noticed that her signs were white. They were just a lot of paper and red letters with their name because that's all the ink they could afford. You know, you were doing the politics of ink at that moment.
Oh, sure.
And it was quantity. And then other candidates in other parts of town have enormous amount of resources, and they would do color printing and things of that sort.
Yeah. Well, when they went to silkscreen printing, right, when Dick Magoon's operation on the north side came in, they started going to all this multicolor kind of printing, and so. But it required more money, so you had to really raise as the advertising changed. It cost more and more and more, and so you had to raise more money.
Well, the way I remember the story was that most of the silk screening, the early silk screening for candidates, was done by Bill Fink's family.
Yes.
At the place there next to Hood Elementary in that little shop,
and
they would do silk screening, but there was just not enough time to do that work, plus run for office, plus run a cigar factory and stuff. And that's how Dick Magoon bought that equipment and started Allied Signs.
Allied Signs, yeah.
And we have a lot of the stuff here from Allied Signs.
Yeah.
Some of it, I think the Ureste was done at the printing shop, but all the design work and the layout was done at Munguia Printers.
Yeah.
And he would send it out, and he would demand that they put the Union Bug if it was coming out of the shop.
Yeah, well, I actually ran a campaign once where, when I used to get my fingers dirty in the ink and stuff, where I walked into Dick Magoon's office, and because I'd never met the man, so I wanted to make sure that we were going to get a good deal from him. And I went down, and almost the first words out of his mouth were, "Do you want the Union Bug on your sign or not?" And we were Democrats, so I said, "Of course we want the Union Bug. You can't run a Democratic Party if you don't have the Union Bug on your sign." And so he said, "Okay, not a problem." And I said, "Is this a union shop?" He said, "Sometimes." And I said, "Okay, fine."
Well, okay. Now you said that you ran a campaign. Give me some background.
I ran Carlos Uresti's first legislative campaign, and then I ran Maria Berrizabal's congressional campaign. I got her to the runoff, and then I got cut loose because we couldn't quite catch up to Charlie Gonzalez, and my successor couldn't close the gap either. And there was a sign that came up earlier when you were speaking with Ed, and we were showing some slides of some signs, and one of them was the sign that we had to run against. And when I saw that sign on the street, I went into Maria and I said, "Maria, without even taking a poll, we're already 15 points down." And she said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Charlie Gonzalez's sign simply say, Gonzalez, Congress." And that was the end of it. That was the end of it. I mean, because everybody, we started, as we were doing our block walking, people were saying, "Well, of course I'm going to vote for the Congress." They all thought it was the old man running. And we could just never overcome that. I mean, he was so, the congressman's memory and reputation was so embedded in the community that you couldn't, I mean, how do you run against a legend, right? So.
Well, even long after Henry B. Retired from Congress and His son was in place. There were still garages on the west side that had the old Keep Henry B in D.C.
Yeah.
The orange and blue signs that still nailed to the side of a garage.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, there's even some stories that say that you can go to some old homes on the west side, and you know, you go to the old folks' room in the back, and they've got La Virgen de Guadalupe, John F. Kennedy, and Henry B. You know, in the altar in the back back there. So.
That's true. So, yeah. I came from a home like that. But I remember a campaign, I think it was the 1972, was it Sissy Farenthold race?
Well, yeah, that she
the
ran.
The governor race at the time, and she was running against, we used to call him Eastock Bill. Oh, yeah. Ended up being governor. But I remember Reuben having to manipulate the campaign manager from one campaign and saying, "Oh, let's go in the back," and then the other campaign manager was in another part of the printing shop, and they were like, back and forth because he was doing printing for both sides.
Yeah, well, he did a lot of that. Yeah.
Well, you have to. I mean, if
he
you're
was
a businessman,
yeah, he was a businessman.
Sure,
I understand that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, we have some things here that you pulled out.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some interesting examples of campaign material. This is from an old city council election by Deborah Guerrero. This is a type
Let's point at that camera up there.
This is a kind of a sign, it's a fan. You can just fan yourself like that on a hot day. But it's Deborah Guerrero for city council. But I remember a lot of these fan kind of things. Here's one that you don't want to do. I had a hard time trying to figure out what this was. And I showed Eddie, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm not sure." It's a thing on Save Our Water. It's a water, but it's sideways and up and down. You do not want to run this kind of material on your campaign. There's too much stuff on it, and the way it's folded, you're not sure where it starts and ends, and it takes some experience to try to take that apart. Another one is a cartoon, a comic book by Al Alonso, who ran for county commissioner. That's when he was much younger. And you go through, and it's a life story of Al Alonso starting when he was born, and it takes him through his life all the way through graduate school and law school, and then he graduates from law school. Nice little thing with a cap and gown. And then I like this one here. This is kind of an unofficial endorsement. It's about his first campaign, how he gets involved. He says, down here at the bottom, it says, Al Alonso became Albert Bustamante's campaign supervisor, right? Like Albert was like going to endorse him. And so, I'd never seen a comic book before. And then, sometimes movie stars get involved, right? In local campaigns. This one's for Phil Hardberger, and he was running for the Fourth Court of Appeals, Place 5, endorsed by Tommy Lee Jones. I think Tommy Lee Jones is his son-in-law. And guess who? Henry B. Gonzalez.
Yeah.
Right? And the rest of it you can't read, it's in fine print, but it's for Phil Hardberger. And this is one that is a school district one. I thought this was interesting. Also, not too much money, only one color. And it insinuates that the Edgewood School District is broken because it says, let's rebuild Edgewood. And then it's got a team of people that are going to rebuild Edgewood.
Well, Edgewood's colors are red and white. So
well, that too.
That probably has something to do with it.
That's true. It also has a union bug down here at the bottom, Munguia Printers. Here's one for another person that had hair a long time ago. Nelson Wolf. And, I hope he's not watching. Mayor of San Antonio, but this is targeted to a specific neighborhood. This is for the east side of San Antonio. And all the individuals listed here are pastors on east side churches. It's a whole list of reverends right down the middle here. And then a lot of African American politicians from the east side of San Antonio. This would only go to that particular neighborhood. Also printed by Munguia Printers. And I picked this one out. This is Mike Villarreal getting the endorsement of one of the first ladies of San Antonio, Elvira Cisneros, Henry Cisneros' mother. Running for a state representative, a fine Democrat minus the Union bug, also printed by Munguia Printers. So sometimes he wouldn't put the Union bug on a sign. And there's Mike with his family and some friends.
Wow.
So those are some examples, some stuff that you don't want to do, some traditional stuff that you see around, and some sorts of people that get involved in campaigns.
Now, there's probably tons of stuff in people's homes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just stuff. And one of the things that Ruben kept were pictures of people who didn't win, simply because they came to the printing shop and they wanted stuff printed,
Right.
but they didn't win. Mm-hmm. And that's what we need help on. We need to identify many of the photographs that we have in our archives, and if people could contact us, it would be very helpful to contact the Hidden Histories.
Absolutely, yeah.
Call here at URBAN-15. We want to figure out a mechanism by way we can get these photographs out to the community, and perhaps with Trinity's help, with UTSA, with other vehicles, we might be able to find out. Because I always thought, I'm kind of a theoretician and a viewer, that it's not who wins the election, but who decides to be a candidate that really is the strength of what a democracy is. And for a long time, people were kept away from being candidates.
Yeah.
And now anybody can actually be a candidate if they have the drive. Unfortunately, you need the money now because of the digital landscape. But in days you could go door to door.
Yeah.
And you could get people to help you. And I wanted to talk your relationship with like Arnold Flores, who is like, for the West Side. If you wanted to run a campaign, you did your printing with Ruben, you did your block walking with Arnold.
Oh yeah. No, there were people like Arnold on the West Side, and there's some other people on the South Side of the city that could put together a whole block walking group for you, an army of people that would go house to house in various blocks. They knew how to break up the neighborhoods, and they knew more or less where your voters were going to be, because they knew the voters that well in the neighborhoods. And if you had a connection with these people, your campaigns were a lot easier, because you'd pay them to do it. It was part of your campaign expenditures, because you have somebody like that to do the block walking. You'd have somebody to run your phone banks inside your campaign. You had another person that would, for instance, drive voters on election day. Sometimes there was some really good, one of the best drivers for voters on election day was Mary Alice Cisneros, because she knew the old ladies and she would pick them up. And sometimes if they had to stop and pick up some tortillas on the way or back home from the poll, she'd stop and let them buy the tortillas. They knew that they could count on her for that.
Free ride.
Oh yeah, no, and that's good relations in a political campaign, because that personal connection and that personal touch like that goes a long way. That vote's going to stay with you forever. And so you hired a lot. Mary Alice didn't get paid, I'm sure, but you hired a lot of folks like that would do things like that, and they would organize all your campaigns. People that put out your yard signs for you on election day, very early in the morning. I don't know if you've ever been to a polling place and all of a sudden you see all the signs all over the place.
We would call dressing the polls.
That's called dressing the polls.
Dressing the polls.
And you'd have guys going out there at 4 o'clock in the morning dressing every poll. So many people had so many polls. So you go out there and put the signs out. They knew exactly which corner to put the signs, whose signs to move away, and how to put your sign in, things like that, There's an art to putting signs on fences, on street corners, to make sure that you get the best strategic location for all that. And those were people like Arnold Flores on the West Side that knew how to do that stuff and knew how to organize all those people. You had to know those folks to run a good campaign.
Well, we used to always make the joke that on the night after a campaign, after 7 o'clock's poll,
Yeah.
the closed poll, that's at 7 o'clock, there was enough plywood on the west side you could put an addition onto your house.
Easily.
And people would go to all the polling sites and just start grabbing all the signs because it was paper on plywood with 2x4 and 2x2 stakes.
Yeah.
And that was what was expensive. I mean, that was a lot of money.
Just the stakes themselves. I remember having to buy bundles and bundles of stakes and trying to figure out the cost of all that. It got expensive just to get those stakes to nail the signs into the ground.
Yeah, the two things, the easy drive stakes over there on. They sold the pine ones.
Right.
But we used to like the ones from Alamo Enterprises, which were cedar tomato stakes.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was ironic that was a store owned by Nelson's father.
Family, yeah, right. Nelson Wolf's family. He had a lot of stakes, yeah.
He had a lot of stake in there, in those campaigns.
Right.
But so we move out of wood and go into plastics, and now we're going into the ephemeral, where we don't have any memories of it. I don't know how many people even save the stuff that comes through the email or through Twitter. We're losing an incredible a generation of bad politics right now.
Well, one of the advantages of the new digital type of advertising is that you can, unlike this kind of advertising where you buy so many hundreds or thousands of a certain size. I mean, you had to order these by size, and each size you'd buy 2,500 of them or 3,000 of them or whatever, would cost a certain amount of money. A sign like that back there, which Republicans for Beto, to me, I'm kind of curious about who paid for that. But a sign like that costs a lot of money, and you could only afford a few of those. So you had to use them very strategically. But now, with digital advertising, and this is like a one-time thing, right? Once you put these out, they're gone. And you can never get, unless you put a lot more money and ask for another run, and then you have to wait in line for the rest of the candidates to get their run through. It was very time consuming and a waste of time. Today, with the digital age and the way they do it, you can get advertised. You, the victim, can be advertised 7 or 8 times a day from the same candidate over and over and over and over again. You see it a lot in campaign contributions. Our favorite son, Julian Castro, will come at you here in San Antonio, for those that are on his list. He'll come at you 7, 8 times a day.
For $15.
Yeah.
It's always $15.
Yeah, he's only asking for a little bit of money, but he'll come at you 7 or 8 times every day. I mean, they can come at you like that. They don't have to hire a bunch of people to go door to door and put a little door hanger on your door, and then maybe a month later, 2 weeks later, or whatever, try to get to you again that way. They can hit you more times in one day now than it was hard to imagine to do that back in these kinds of days when we had print signs.
No, you asked about the Republicans for Beto sign.
Yeah.
That was on Lone Star Boulevard the morning after the Texas primaries, and it was lining the street face down, and I thought that it was just a piece of construction material that had fallen off a truck and probably had nails and stuff sticking up.
Yeah.
So I pulled my truck over and moved it over to the side, and I looked on the bottom, and I said, this is a collector's manna from heaven, and I haven't seen another one. So that's
I'm wondering if Beto has seen that.
He could have used it.
Yeah, well, maybe. I'm not sure.
But the other one that I really like is the fluoride one, because that was a really bitter. That was a tough campaign.
Yeah, absolutely.
And unfortunately, I don't have any of the cap. The big black, red, and white signs that were printed. It was the vote no against the cap.
Yeah.
What was his name? Stubbs.
Oh, C.A. Stubbs.
C.A. Stubbs,
yes. Right.
was the one that pushed for the cap.
Right.
But these are important benchmarks in San Antonio's history.
Absolutely.
And we have to somehow or other keep these icons in place. And there is no repository here in San Antonio where we can keep the stuff. We can.
Well, yeah.
Maybe UTSA, maybe UT.
I don't know. I mean, part of the difficulty for bulk material like this is just that. It's bulk, right? And so you have to have an institution that can afford the climate control conditions that allow them to keep these things so that they don't deteriorate. And then you see from signs like that and all these kinds of signs, there's so many of them out there because we have so many candidates over so many years that, you know, it would take a very large facility to just store it all. So what they do, a lot of it, is digitize a lot of the material now. And I'm not sure what happens to the original materials, but you'd have to find an institution large enough and sophisticated enough and with the resources to be able to do that. A university, a tier 1 research university would do it. UT Austin or maybe UTSA would probably be the best ones to do something like that. But I don't know. I'm not sure. They'd have to determine whether or not it's worthwhile.
And there's a very limited number of human beings that really want to go through these collections. There's only, you know, because they weren't part of it.
Right.
And then they just become memorabilia, and eventually become artifact, and then some kind of sideshow attraction.
Sure. Well, I mean, you look at the one right behind you. Elect George Harrison to ACC board. I thought that was a Beatle.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't remember him, you know, as a candidate.
Yeah, that's a pretty amazing one. He passed away recently.
Did he really?
Yeah.
You know, speaking to what you were talking about earlier about democracy being the kind of political world where someone can run for office whenever they want to. We just lost a perennial candidate, Bert Ciccone.
Bert Ciccone
passed away last week, and he had run for city council like 9 times and ran for the mayor once at least that I know of, and he was always out there running. He had an opinion about some things that he felt strongly about, and he wanted to run about it. But you know, he was never popular enough to get enough votes to really make a dent in anybody's campaign. But it was an example of somebody who could just go in there and run for office continuously. I liked his signs. His signs were kind of classy when they were around. Yeah.
The other one is this gentleman back here, Rhett Smith.
Rhett Smith.
Rhett Smith is a perennial candidate.
He's another perennial candidate.
Very, very good man, honorable Native American, who sees his voice as important into the dialogue.
Yeah.
But again, with modern debates and everything, a lot of these people just do not surface.
Yeah, and they don't. You know, they're not. They don't have the connections that that a lot of the other candidates, like a Nelson Wolff, for instance. Nelson was born into a family that was well connected, and he was well connected as a teenager, and stayed connected and kept expanding his network broadly. On the west side, and you saw from that campaign on the east side, that campaign material, and he was a south sider, and now he's well liked on the north side. He's the county judge, and he could probably stay in that office as long as he wanted to, although I think he's probably contemplating leaving pretty soon. Talk about connections. He had them in the Mexican American community. He had them in the black community. He has them in the Anglo community. He has them in the business community and labor unions. He's got a very broad and deep network. Somebody like a Rhett Smith could never run against somebody like that. And the successful candidates like Nelson Wolff or the mayoral candidate like Ed Garza, they're the ones that are well connected. They develop these networks and connections. Henry B. Gonzalez had developed a network also with the African American community and the West Side community. So I mean, Henry Cisneros. So any of those successful candidates, a small person, not a small person, but an individual that's not well known, just wouldn't stand a chance running against those folks.
Well, look, we are running out of time for tonight. You have to go vote in the morning, don't forget.
I voted already. I'm an early voter, yeah.
Vote once, please. But let's continue this conversation, as I mentioned earlier with Eddie. And I think that we're moving in a direction where we're still trying to get a grip of what happened right after World War II and how our community emerged to be a powerful part of town. The South Side and the West Side, you know, we took enormous steps from life before, you know, World War II.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of it has to do with the fact that we had professionals like printers and radio people like Mr. Cortez and the Nicolas family that helped
That's right.
immensely.
That's
The
right.
Davilas.
The Davilas.
And the Davilas.
Absolutely.
So anyway, Hidden Histories, we're about to close up for this month. Next month, we are moving to December 9th, not December 2nd. It'll be the second Monday of the month. And we really have some live performers that are going to be coming in, and it's going to be a great musical evening. So Hidden Histories, thank you. Again, Dr. Flores and Eddie, for your contributions tonight. Want to thank all of you out there, and just get in touch with us and suggest what we need to do here at Urban 15. Thank you. Good night.